The Cupertino Library presents Post-Truth Politics, a panel discussion. Today's event will feature Devin Fehely, a KPIX 5 investigative reporter, and Larry Gerston, a professor emeritus of political science at San Jose State University and political analyst at NBC Bay Area. And now your moderator for today's event, Rosalind Donald.
Welcome to the Cupertino Library's panel on post-truth politics. The Oxford Dictionary chose post-truth as their word of the year for 2016. Post-truth is defined as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. My staff and I created this event because we are worried about all the rumor and half-truths being circulated by media at all points on the political spectrum. At the library, we pride ourselves on being an unbiased source of information. We offer books, magazines, newspapers, and ebooks with a wide range of political viewpoints. Did you know you could subscribe to the New York Times online through the library? How many of you knew you could subscribe to the online New York Times? Raise your hand. Yes. With your library card, the smartest card in your wallet. It is free. Libraries are not free. They cost a great deal of money. Luckily, your tax dollars are at work here. You can also get access to over 3,000 international newspapers through Press Reader. That is also available with your library card through the library website. And you all have a brochure on your chairs that explains how to get access online. Also, we have a whole flanks of librarians over there who are happy to get you started if you need help. So here at the library, we are dedicated to providing a wide range of viewpoints. We offer newspapers and magazines so our cardholders can keep up with current events. We offer access to the internet so cardholders can access all the information on the web. However, the advent of fake news means that some of these library resources are tainted. How do I, as a steward of public information resources, continue to be a trusted source of information? I have a lot of questions about this, and I'm hoping to get some guidance today from our panelists. I'm Rosalind Donald. I'm the acting community librarian for Cupertino Library. And I want to thank our panelists, Devin Fehely of KPIX TV, and Dr. Larry Gerston, a retired San Jose State professor of political science, for making time to visit with us today. I know there are a lot of events happening around the Bay Area today, and I appreciate all of you making the time and attending today's event. I would also like to thank the Friends of the Library whose incredible efforts with their book sales make it possible for us to have events like this here at the library. Last, before we get to the questions, I want to emphasize that this is not a partisan event. Post-truth culture affects the entire political spectrum. I encourage you to write your questions on the index cards that you find on your chairs and hand them out to one of our library staff members who will bring them up on stage, and I'll read them and ask the questions. And so, with that, let's get started. So, this is we also collected questions through our SurveyMonkey online form, and we got quite a few, almost 20, and half of them came in today. I thought that was interesting. And so I'm going to lead with a question that did come in over the SurveyMonkey. Have we ever believed what politicians say? Isn't the lying going on in politics today just a matter of degree? Did we believe Herbert Hoover when he promised a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage? So, Dr. Gerston, why don't you lead off?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that politicians have always extended the truth. And I think what's really critical here is, number one, to what extent? And number two, how do we learn about what can be done about what they say? What information can we gather that would either ratify or undermine what they say? Interesting, there's some organizations now that give us a lot of information on that. One is, I've used this at NBC Bay Area, where I'm the political analyst, PolitiFact. PolitiFact analyzes all the things that candidates say and then comes up with what percentage of the time they're telling the truth, exaggerating truth, and lying. There were a couple of candidates last time that were very high in the lying scale. Every one of them, one way or the other, exaggerated the truth. So our job, I think, as citizens, is to, number one, never take anything at face value. I don't care if they say the sky's blue. We've got to check it out. And I think that's where it's not just politicians who may be letting us down, but we let ourselves down by not being vigilant enough to check out what people are saying instead of automatically believing it.
Devin, what do you have anything to add?
I think the way that I would begin to sort of answer that question is that there's an assumption that's kind of built into it that seems to be a little bit flawed in the sense, because he was talking about campaign promises. I think that it's sort of incumbent upon any candidate to kind of articulate a vision. Where are we now? Where do we want to be with me at the helm? And I think that most people have the maturity and the wisdom to understand that there's a difference between campaign rhetoric and political reality, that everything that is promised to you from the stump may or may not come to fruition. I mean, I think we understand that. But I don't know if that's where the line is in terms of politicians being honest or less than honest. I think that what became an issue in this last campaign cycle is that people were saying things that just were untrue. And even when presented with evidence of the fact that what they said wasn't true or was based on a report that was fictitious or erroneous, or it wasn't a trusted source, just kind of doubled down and said, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's the general idea of what I'm trying to say, even if the actual facts are not true. So I generally think that people kind of know the difference between something that's being promised to you as president, I'm going to make things great, and I'm going to improve the economy, and I'm going to bring jobs back. And if those things don't come to fruition, I don't know if that necessarily makes that a lie or the person giving voice to those promises on the campaign trail a liar. I think that the line between what's true and what's false is someplace else. And I think that in part, it also more broadly goes back to the fact that I think that there is a growing distrust of old school or traditional media. That oftentimes now that we are so polarized that we're not looking for information, we're looking for confirmation of what we believe. And so we go to sources that are more likely to support our viewpoint. And I think that can be problematic because I think the role still of traditional media is to be an arbiter of what is objectively true and false, where that can be determined.
Okay. So I have a question for the audience now. You thought you were just going to sit there, but no, you get to participate. So I want to ask you this question, and then I'm going to ask our panelists. So you talked about how people don't trust traditional news outlets anymore, and I agree, and that's one of my concerns. I mean, as a librarian, that's sort of what I offer is traditional news outlets. Yes, we offer access to the web as well, but the New York Times, the Guardian, the Globe. WikiLeaks considers itself a media outlet. So I'm going to ask the audience, do you agree or disagree? So how many people agree that WikiLeaks is a media outlet? Raise your hand. Okay.
Define media outlet, please.
Well, that's what WikiLeaks calls itself. I don't know. What do you think, Devin? What would you call a media outlet?
I think that's something that's harder by the day to define. Because quite honestly, someone that has, a blog considers themselves a journalist, I think that you would almost have to come up with a definition for yourself on something.
I can't answer that question.
That's okay. I was only asking for a show of hands, not a master's. So, what do you think?
Well, if a media outlet refers to an entity that releases information, then you could say WikiLeaks is a media outlet. But the question then becomes, what about the information they release? What about the context of that information? What about the veracity of that information? What about all those things? So just releasing information in itself isn't any good unless one has faith in the information that's been released, and that gets back to square one. You're verifying what you read and hear. I do agree that people are less trusting of the media. And I think there are a few reasons for that. I think in some ways, of course, what media are we talking about? Are we talking about newspapers? Are we talking about cable? Are we talking about traditional radio and television stations, and networks and whatnot? Oftentimes, we try to take shortcuts. We look to see, as you said, who's saying what we like, and we're done. And that's where, once again, I harp on this. I harp on this in my classes. I harp on this whenever I can. We have responsibility, not just to take at face value whatever we read or say or hear. We need to mine these things, and I'm afraid that we see less and less of that. And that's why we go ahead and go to whatever outlet fits in with our own value.
So, let's see. Do you want to add anything to that, or
Yes, I would. I mean,
jump right in? You don't have to wait for me.
Before I came over here today, I was listening to a press conference by our new president. He was addressing the intelligence community. And towards the end of that address, he kind of pivoted into one of his kind of attack lines on the media. He was talking about today how he feels that the media are, and this is a paraphrase, but this is more or less what he said, some of the most dishonest people you'll ever meet. Now, just personally and professionally, I find that to be both untrue and somewhat offensive, because it is my job and my livelihood. But it has become something that has been very commonplace during the campaign, and likely appears to be something that will extend into his presidency. Kind of a war on the press, or at the very least an adversarial relationship with the press, which is okay, because I think most journalists understand that our relationship with people in positions of power, wherever they fall in the political spectrum, at times of necessity is going to have to be somewhat adversarial. But I think it's important to note that I don't think journalists are liars. We are not just bold-faced liars. I think that the truth, insofar as that can be determined objectively, is something that is fundamentally important to us. It's our job. We're passionate about it. We believe that it is the bedrock and the cornerstone of our society and of our democracy. And we are not going to knowingly report something that is untrue, verifiably untrue, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, because our names, our faces, and our voices are all associated with that report. And as a journalist, your credibility is your stock in trade. Once you have squandered that by getting something wrong or knowingly getting something wrong, that's very difficult to get back. And also there is also the ever-present threat of being sued. You can be sued if you publish something that is libelous or slanderous. You can get, TV stations get sued. So I think both of those things as a practical matter, other than just our own pride in what we do and sense of professionalism, means that we most of the time are doing everything within our power to get the information right. And I think that, and I'll get off my soapbox, but I think that something like that has to be said in the face of someone saying journalists broadly, across the board in broad brushstrokes, are the biggest liars you'll ever meet. And they're lying all the time, and they're doing it intentionally, and this is a an effort to delegitimize me or undermine me, and I just think that is not true.
And one of the problems, Devin, is drawing that continuum that we call journalists. Where does it begin and where does it end? Someone who does straight news reporting, whether it's writing, whether it's on air, yeah, that's a journalist. And then you get farther out and you start talking in terms of commentators or people who have news shows like Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or people at MSNBC along with Fox. And then you've slid, unknowingly almost, I think, to a lot of viewers, from news reporting to news assessing and analyzing. And that's where I think things get very sketchy.
But oftentimes, the news organizations that the president, in this instance, and I mention this only because he did it today, he did it a few hours ago, that he's calling out are often what we think of as sort of the giants of the industry. I mean, he's talking about the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the network news, people that try extraordinarily hard to get it right because there are profound consequences, personally and professionally, for getting it wrong.
And he's calling them out because, quite frankly, he doesn't like what they write. It's that simple.
Right.
I don't like what you've written. It's not even a question of whether they're lying, and they're not. Everybody makes mistakes, but in the stories I've read in the New York Times and other places, they're not lies. They're just reporting things he doesn't want said. And you're right, a lot of that's inherent. There is this adversarial relationship between elected officials and the press, because the press is going to ask questions elected officials don't like to deal with, right? Go away. Well, you can't, of course. But in fact, when the press is writing stuff, material, stories that just is factually based, then it's not a question of bad journalism if someone like the president or anybody else for that matter doesn't like it. It's the fact that he doesn't, or she doesn't in some cases, like what's been written, period.
For one thing, if you have questions for our panelists, please write them on the index cards, and one of my staff will pick them up. Laura, I see one right over here. So please write questions on the index cards, and they'll bring them up, and I'll fold them in as our conversation continues. So please do write your questions. So for this election cycle, do you think the press asked the right questions? I don't know how to define right questions either.
I will begin this by saying that I think the press in the earliest stages of the presidential campaign was extremely undisciplined. I'm talking about the cable television particularly, and that they weren't fair in terms of the way they treated the various candidates. One person did a study that said over the first year of this campaign, from early 15, June 15, through March or April of 16, Donald Trump received $2 billion worth of free publicity, because anytime he said, "I'm here, come talk to me," there was CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they were all there, almost groveling to get what he had to say and not giving the same kind of attention to other candidates. And those other candidates, by the way, had a point. They had a point.
They did.
They were not treated with the same level of fairness. And frankly, because I think, at least in the case of MS and the CNN, these guys were laughing at now President Trump. He was a caricature to them. They couldn't believe it. This is great entertainment. We can fill all our airtime. And in the process of giving him all that room, he was able to separate himself from all the others, and I think benefited tremendously. So for the first half of this campaign, I think that was true. For the second half, it was another story altogether. That's my take.
So kind of between the primaries and the
Yeah. Once we got through the
regular
primaries, but some would say by that time there was such an incredible advantage for candidate Trump over the others that it was kind of hard for anybody to catch up. Now that doesn't mean that you have to give everybody the same amount of time. It's crazy. But this was pretty absurd, and it's been documented.
Do you have anything you wanted to add? Or?
Yeah, I would say that I think as a journalist, there was a presumption, if we're being perfectly honest, that at some point, the president's candidacy or campaign would just simply run out of steam. That at some point, he would say something so outrageous or so offensive that people would begin to turn away. That there would be a pivot to one of the other candidates that was still in the race. And then that never happened. I mean, I think that we have to recognize in some ways that there was something unique, either about this moment in our country or about this candidate or his campaign, because there were things that he said that if other people had said them throughout the campaign, they would have been very quickly shown the door. And those things, I think, to the people that supported President Trump, and instead of kind of turning them against him, I think that they said, well, you know, here's someone who finally, you know, he's not politically correct. He just says the things that maybe we say privately, but have learned that, you know, maybe we shouldn't say these in front of other people who may not believe the same thing, but maybe we think these things, or we say these things when we're in our kitchens. Or maybe we don't say these things, but we just like the fact that we like the fact that he's off the cuff and unpolished and says things that somebody might think is offensive, but it just means he's not part of the political class. He's something else. And that's what I want. So I don't know if there was anything that the press did or didn't do that likely would have changed the outcome of what happened. Because I just think that this was a unique moment in time in this country. I think that there was, for reasons that I don't completely grasp or understand, but this was his moment. And I think the traditional political calculus just didn't apply.
Well, it's interesting because I wouldn't agree with that. I think that you have to divide that campaign at least into two parts, maybe more. But what I find interesting is that in the post-election review, what happened? How did it happen? So many, at least columnists, wrote that they didn't do due diligence, or that New York Times columnists, or that too many people let candidates get away with things without cornering them. So I think there would be some members who would say, you know what, we dropped the ball. Now, I'm not about to say that because the ball was dropped, that's the reason. Because as you said, I quite agree. There were a number of reasons that the election ended the way it did. But I think part of it, you know, we all have responsibilities here. And nationally, I think there were some balls dropped. There were some balls dropped. And that's been confirmed, I think, by some of the mea culpas that have been said post-November 8th.
Mm-hmm. But do you think, and this would be my question, do you think that even if those journalists had dug deeper or had published more articles about things that were said or the implications of certain policy statements that are made on the campaign, do you think that those articles, those arguments, would have reached people and swayed enough people to change the outcome of this election?
That's a good question, and it's hard to answer, because that variable is stuck. It's there. And we don't know what would have happened had it been removed. We do know that there were a number of factors that swayed this election beyond the press. I mean, it's important as we think the press is, you know, a number of factors. The Russians and what they did, the social media and its impact, the way the campaigns were run. Clinton's campaign was run terribly ineffectively. I know a lot of people who are liberals don't like to hear that. But it was a terribly run campaign. You would have thought after 8 years she would have learned that lesson. She had twice the money Trump had. She had 3 times as many people on the ground as he had, and she still bungled it. So, I mean, I think there were a number of factors. I can't separate that out and say it would have been different, but I think we can leave it in and say it was part of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's turn to some audience questions. I clearly didn't need to prepare because you all have done all the work for me. Thank you very much. There's several questions that are kind of all around the same topic. So if I don't read your question, I apologize, but we'll get to kind of the content. So this one says, whether or not you consider WikiLeaks a news outlet, They released the truth in the words of the authors of the emails. The WikiLeaks did not interpret or opine on the content. It was raw facts in that they were reproduced with written or as written without filter. Do I need Dan Rather to tell me what the email content means? So I could read it again if you want me to.
No,
Oh, there are longer ones.
I just don't know where Dan Rather comes in, that poor guy. I just don't know. But I mean,
I think, a media person.
here's the deal with WikiLeaks. We know that the Russians hacked both parties. They hacked both.
Yeah.
They decided they were going to see as much of the Democratic material released as possible. Why? How many emails have you written that you never say to anybody directly or another person besides the one you're writing it to? We all do this. We write emails to people about things and sometimes don't even think about what they mean, the significance, because we assume they'll be kept private. I mean, so when John Podesta gave out his linguine recipe or whatever it was, he assumed it would be private. And what the Russians did, to their credit, if you are looking at how they manipulated things, they went ahead and saw to it that all those things, all those internal discussions would be released, embarrassing a lot of politicians. The Republicans had just as many, I promise you, but they weren't released. So that helped set the scene for a lot of conversation to go over and over again about what was said, how it was said, what it was meant. People lost their position. Debbie Wasserman Schultz lost her position as DNC chair. Donna Brazile caught hell for her involvement with a couple of the debates. All these things. Well, the Republicans are doing all these things. They weren't necessarily outrageous, except these Democratic things were outrageous because they stood alone. And by the way, I don't think that made the difference in the election either. As I said, I will say this over and over again, there were a series of factors that define the outcome of this election. But clearly, yeah, WikiLeaks was in that case leaking the truth. But the truth was leaked only for one side.
I would, in general, agree with that. I mean, as journalists, I think we like to look at what we call primary sources. So, to the extent that there's going to be a data dump and people can just read something and make it up, and make up their mind for themselves, I don't necessarily see a problem with that. But I do think that if you look a little bit deeper, there appears to have been an agenda about what was released, perhaps, and what was not. Just as a little bit of an aside, on a lighter note, John Podesta's risotto recipe.
Obviously, I didn't read that one.
The actual person that sent that email is my cousin. And that is not a joke. He lives down in San Diego. He worked for years for the Clinton Foundation. Well, I won't go into the personal stuff, but he's got a close relationship with the Podesta family to this day. And we were kind of tickled because he got married recently, and it bubbled up right at the time he was getting married, and so he's the person that sent the question about risotto.
Thereby proving that there is only 6 degrees of separation between anyone in the world.
Exactly.
That is a truly random factoid. So I got several questions kind of about media and ratings. So several people have asked a question that more or less says, since the media is driven by ratings, won't media just report, sorry, losing my train of thought. So won't the media just report anything that drives ratings? This one says, media too concerned with ratings. News connected with ratings is the problem. So, I mean, TV stations, radio stations, and newspapers are businesses.
And they have been.
Always have been. That's not new.
For the entirety of their existence. So newspapers and magazines depend on advertising revenue. We depend on the revenue that comes from commercials. And there is a direct link in terms of how many people watch us every night and how much we can charge the people that buy, the businesses that buy commercials in those newscasts. To say otherwise just isn't true, and it's just not the reality of. It is a business. Now, I'm thankful each week because, strangely enough, Channel 5 pays me every week instead of bi-monthly or anything like that my checks don't bounce. But the number of car commercials that are in the newscast that either precede or come after me is not something that I think about. The people that put our newscast together are trying to put together something that is topical, that is informative, that is entertaining or of interest to people. But I think the notion that at least local television news is wholly driven by what's going to get the most people in there. It's sort of like a carnival barker. I mean, if you make outrageous claims, someone may come into the tent that one time, but if you have oversold and underdelivered, they're not going to tune in the next day. You know, I think that we all understand that our relationship with our viewers, with our community, is one of trust and it's one over time. And if we just report the most salacious, the most outrageous things, and if we somehow, if the tether to truth gets snapped, you guys aren't going to tune in the next day. You know, you want to know what's going on in your community. You want to have some context, you want to have some depth, you want to present it in an interesting way. But if we're presenting something that is not factually accurate, that does not give you the larger content, that's not fair, if our opinion is readily apparent, I think that's going to be off-putting. And it would be dangerously short-sighted for a TV station to have that as its approach to covering news.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things. One is, I think it depends upon the area. There's a lot of competition around here. Competition, television stations are looking for you to watch them. Radio stations want you to listen to them. Newspapers and whatnot. And so, you know, people are trying to get the best stories out there so that you'll watch them or read them or whatever, and they'll get their advertisers. That's how it flows. It's not what the advertisers want us to say. Now, the caveat to that is, if you're in a one TV station town or one newspaper town, and there's one big industry in that town, you know, like a steel town, like an automobile town or something like that, that's another story. Then I think we can see examples of where the press bends because they don't want to lose that kind of thing, that kind of support. I think we've seen that in many cases. But in a cosmopolitan area like this, where to boot, you've got a fairly sophisticated audience in the Bay Area, and you've got all these different channels, you're going to see people striving to get the best stories they can get out. Yeah, and sometimes you'll see all stations. You know, at our station, we've got 5 or 6 of those great big screens up, and everybody's talking about the same thing. You know, you say, why is that going on? Have they colluded? No, it's because these guys, each independently, in their meetings they have in the morning, have said, this is the story. This is what we have to do. And I think that's refreshing. It doesn't scare me. I say, you know what? A lot of people came to the same idea there independently. I like that. So in an area like this, in New York, Chicago, LA, I think you're going to find a lot of people trying to do their very best for you. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to turn the conversation a little bit, although we could probably go on about this for a long, long time. I want to turn it a little bit to the role of social media. First of all, I have a question for the audience. So how many of you check your social media, whether it be Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or Reddit or one of those other sites, at least once a day? Raise your hand.
Be honest.
Yeah, be honest. More than once a day. Oh, come on, be honest. More, once an hour. There's the honest folks in the audience. I admit I have a terrible Facebook habit because it's been shown that there have been studies that show that checking your Facebook pushes the same endorphins that chocolate chip cookies and cocaine do. Just are less high and less fat afterwards. And so
that's a good business model for them.
Yeah, it works. It's worked for Facebook. But how about never? Okay, how many of you never use social media, say Facebook?
Wow.
Wow.
Okay. There are some normal people here.
Yeah, there's some normal people here. So, Facebook has started to curb the occurrences of fake news on its site. How would you define success for Facebook's efforts? In other words, what would success look like to you? For those of us who aren't addicted.
Look, here's my take on this stuff. We get all these wonderful inventions, and it takes society a while to figure them out. When cars first came out, they were running over people left and right because people thought, I got to stay away from them. They're faster than horses. You know, when the radio came out, we had to figure out how to use that. When television came out, what do we do about that? And Facebook is like this too. It's something new, and we're all trying to get our hands around it. And Facebook's got a responsibility, and we have a responsibility. I go back to that over and over again because I'm tired of people always foisting responsibility off on everybody else except us. We have that responsibility for looking at stuff on Facebook if it's junk and making a comment that is junk or just turning away from it. Facebook has a responsibility, and they're grappling with this right now. They are grappling like crazy. They were stunned in the election with fake news because they were trying to be neutral and not any kind of an arbiter. They figured out that doesn't work for their users or the general good. And so they're now grappling with that. And I think it's going to be a while, but from what I've read, they're making considerable efforts and strides towards weeding out fake news. I don't think it'll ever be perfect. It isn't.
No.
It's not going to be perfect. But I think, because they feel that responsibility, that social responsibility to their 1.8 billion users, well, that was before we started. I don't know how many now.
Yeah, probably half a billion.
Yeah, probably added 500 million. They will do that. I think so.
Yeah, I would generally agree. In getting prepared for this today, I kind of looked up some of the stories that had appeared on Facebook during this last election cycle that got a lot of traction, a lot of people looking at them, liking them, sharing them, that were just completely false. And so I actually printed out some of the headlines of stories that circulated on Facebook, and I'll just go through them a couple of times. So WikiLeaks confirms that Hillary sold weapons to ISIS. 750,000 people liked or shared that particular headline and story, and was later just proven to be certifiably false. Pope Francis shocks, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases statement. That one almost had 1 million people read it, like it, share it. And then this one had over 2 million. Obama signs executive order banning Pledge of Allegiance in schools nationwide. If you think about the reach of Facebook, if we had 1.8 billion people going to the Channel 5 website every day,
You'd be happy.
we would be really happy. I would have to ask them to move the decimal point on my paycheck if we had that many people checking us out every day. So in the aftermath of the election, Facebook initially said, we don't have a positive obligation to try and weed out fake news. We're not a traditional media company. Now, they've come back and they've modified that because I think they understand when you reach 1.8 billion people, I think Channel 5 might even be happy with 1.8 million, but they have 1.8 billion people, that you have some responsibility to the people that use your website to ensure, to the extent that you can, that patently false news and information doesn't pop up in your news feed. Now, if somebody wants to share a link, post a link to a story that's false that they read and they want to circulate it, there's not much you can really do with that. But I think the stories that pop up on their news feed, that there is an expectation that there's some level of truth or credibility to those. So I think it's something that they're grappling with. And it's an evolving system because now, they want people to report something that's false and then they turn to traditional journalists and then they pull it down, or they've got algorithms that can check something. But I think it's an issue because, one other fact that I found was that 2/3 of American adults get some of their news from social media. a lot of that from Facebook and from Twitter and from some of the other social media outlets. So the media landscape has shifted. And you can question the legitimacy of some of these sources of information, but it is where, whether you like it or not, it's where people are getting their information.
Yeah, and to show you how fast the landscape is changing on this, Facebook 3 or 4 months ago had editors checking news coming in and trying to determine what was real and what isn't, and they caught what not for that. Oh, you're trying to weed out stuff. So after they tried to take the line of making sure what comes in is legitimate, they backed off because people thought they were now controlling the news. So you back off, and then you get other stuff to come in. So that's part of it. And they're going to get there because I think, you learn a lot about corporations. And there's this whole concept of social responsibility. And some of them have it and some of them don't. Starbucks is a great example. They've got social responsibility. They pay their people more money. They're giving you an online opportunity to get a college degree. I call that social responsibility. We can name some other ones. Facebook, I think, is one of those companies. They have social responsibility. And their problem is to figure out how to get it right.
What about Google?
Google's another one. Yeah, Google. I think Google spends a lot of money trying to come up with ideas that will benefit society. Now, but remember, Google has a different space than Facebook does. Facebook is more of a news site, so Google is not.
It's interesting you say Facebook is more of a news site because I don't think of it as a news site, but I think people do use it as a news site.
I don't think it is either.
Right.
But in fact, Devin's point, 2/3 go to social media for news. Now the question is, what are you reading?
Yeah, in preparing for this panel, I read a Pew study on the modern news consumer, and their study shows that something like 70% of the people they surveyed used Facebook as a news site. So whether they meant it for it to be or not, it is. So I've gotten a number of questions that all kind of circle around the same topic of, okay, all this news is out there. What can we rely on? First of all, I want to point out the library is a source of unbiased information. If you have a library card, the smartest card in your wallet. We do offer a wide range of news sources. So, sorry, just a little plug. What can we rely on? Where do you go to fact check? I mean, do I have to check PolitiFact for every news story that I read? How does your average, well-intentioned, conscious political consumer do that and still work and sleep, and occasionally interact with their families?
Well, I would say that a certain amount of common sense has to come in at some point. If you see a headline that seems outrageous, it seems like it just makes the back of your head, the kind of tickle a little bit, you may want to a healthy dose of skepticism, I think, is good for journalists, and it's good just for consumers of news as well. And if it seems like, wait a sec, can that really be true? You may want to see if other, what are generally considered to be reputable news organizations, the New York Times or something like that, if they've picked up on the reporting. There are places that, like PolitiFact, that will kind of rate the truthfulness of certain statements and certain stories. Snopes, that's STOPES.com, is a pretty good resource for things that are just kind of hoaxes, false news. You can find them.
So Snopes is a good one?
Snopes is a pretty good one, yeah. It's
SN. You said ST.
Oh, I'm sorry.
SNOPES.com. It's okay.
And so they've got, that's one that you're probably good, because it'll give you a bit of the history. It'll tell you where it originated. It'll, that's a good way to kind of weed some of that stuff out. But the basic thing is you just have to, a little bit of common sense and skepticism. If it seems too outrageous, something that just doesn't seem believable, then you're better off doing some additional research to see.
Yeah, those are wise words. Be skeptical. That doesn't mean you dismiss everything, but could this be true? Did the Pope really endorse Donald Trump? I mean, come on.
Has the
Let's
Pope
think
ever
about this.
endorsed a political
No,
candidate?
of course not.
Good.
They go out of their way not to be political. It doesn't mean that some of the things they do aren't viewed as political by some people.
Right.
No. But I mean, some of it doesn't make common sense. I happen to believe in getting as many, now, okay, I'm not normal on this. I get 5 newspapers a day. I know, that's sick. And I don't know how many magazines. Because I want to really dig down and get whatever I can. And it's amazing how sometimes the same story by good people, by smart people, by well-intentioned people, will be written with a different hue. That's kind of important to me, to see. And I don't think normal people would do that. And I'm not suggesting any of you do that. And it's believe me, many psychiatrists have wondered.
So which 5 do you read?
Yeah, what do you read?
I got to think about this. The Merc, the Chronicle, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the LA Times.
Okay.
Not
And
an
if I had it,
international source?
I'm sorry?
Not an international
No, if I had it in my druthers, if I had my druthers, I'd also get the Sacramento Bee, but I'm afraid my wife would kill me. But I mean, but that's me, and I realize that. But I think, when you get a story, if it just doesn't seem right, check it out someplace else. Go to another source. And the League of Women Voters, by the way, right? You guys know this. You should. When it comes to local and state issues, they throw stuff out there. Here's what it is. Here's what it stands for. Here's what it means. Okay? Sometimes it recommends, sometimes it doesn't, but you go all the way through the analysis. And I myself look to that a number of times to make, because you get those ballot issues, I know every word is in English, but by the time I get to the third one, I don't know what they're talking about. Right? And how many times do you have no in it? This will not happen because this can't happen, yes or no. What? So I mean, we need to simplify that kind of stuff. That's another discussion for another time. But by going to good sources, I think, many sources, that helps.
And many sources. I will point out that through the library resource Press Reader, you can get news from over 3,000 different sources and quite a few international ones. Yes. I know, your wife now hates me with your library card. And I often find it informative.
I'll be busy.
Yeah. So I often find it very interesting to read articles from the UK or Amsterdam. The newspapers are in their original languages, but they have a translate function that will give you the drift.
Right, and just to add to that, I don't know how many of you, I'll bet a number of you get The Economist. Yeah, that's terrific. I mean, it takes you a month to read a week's issue. But I mean, when their stuff they have on the United States is just phenomenal, and other countries as well.
Okay. We're coming up on the end of our time here, so I'm not going to be able to get to all of your many, many questions. I feel like we ought to publish an FAQ after this. But one thing that I did want to bring up is, here's another question from the audience. What, if anything, is the difference between truthful and factual? Does it have anything to do with context? That is more of a philosophical question. But yeah, it is, there's truthful and there's factual, and I think that kind of gets at another crux here, is what I feel to be true may not be what you feel to be true and have little or nothing to do with the facts.
Yeah, I would have to think a little more deeply about that, but I would say just on, just kind of the quick response is, I mean, a fact is something that you can objectively verify. And in the larger context of those facts, people can look at the same set of facts and come to a different conclusion. It's often said that everyone can have their own opinion, but not their own facts. And that's why I think facts matter. And I think that, as a journalist, it's not necessarily our job to come to that conclusion for you in some type of complex issue. But if we present you with the facts, if we present you with people on both sides of an issue who may have a different interpretation of what those facts should lead you to do, then that's the point at which we've passed the baton to you, and you guys can decide, well, do I believe this guy, or do I believe this person? Do I think that we should go in this direction based on those facts, or that one? But you've got the facts, and I think that's what's important.
Did you have anything?
Works for me.
Okay. So, Here's a quote from a Neil Gabler article that I found when I was doing some research for this. "The value-neutral media ideal," in quotes, "has left us with a society drained of kindness and mutual responsibility toward one another. We must fight against what we've wrought." Let's see, do you agree the media is value-neutral? If so, what needs to change?
Of course not. I mean, who among us is value neutral? I mean, it's hard to even put those two words together. You know, we all have values. That's all there is to it. Every single one of us, from the earliest days on, has values about this or that. And in some cases, they're universal. Everybody feels that way. And in some cases, we're going on our own route and whatnot. So, I mean, no, I don't think the media is any more value neutral than the rest of us. I do think that the media strives, and I know it's an anti-media society, and I've been involved with it at NBC for 37 years, that the media strives to do its best to present both sides, to present an issue with all of the facts around it, and leave it to you to go ahead and decide whether this is something that makes sense or not, what not. I think they work very hard at it. They have editors looking at what people write. They have wordsmiths, you know, making sure the words are appropriate. And some in fact, do a much better job than others. The New York Times is a great newspaper for that reason. Yet the New York Times has admitted that they didn't handle the election very well in the first few months. And so, no, none of us is perfect. Otherwise, we'd be somewhere else.
Did you have a reaction?
Yeah, I would say, I think what that person is perhaps trying to allude to is that there is a notion in television about equal time. Mm-hmm. That if one person says something, that the way that is balanced is by going and getting someone on the other side of the issue and letting them respond or answer to that. And I think that perhaps what that person is trying to get to is that as journalists, to the extent that something can be proven to be inaccurate, that's our job. And it's not sufficient, and it's not enough to simply allow someone to say something if it's not true. You need to challenge that person. And it's not simply sufficient to go get someone on the other side and just put both of those people talking in your story and not really bring attention to the fact that what one of them said wasn't true, if it wasn't true. That's kind of our job.
Yeah, and to that, I mean, just if a general says, we're about to lose 4,000 troops from an attack from someone or whatever, and then you go to Sam Smith in the street and you say, well, what do you think about that, Sam? No, that's not true. Well, you got two people, but obviously one has a whole lot more merit than the other, and that's the nuanced part that sometimes gets lost. Yeah.
And on that, I think we're going to have to close. First of all, would you join me in applauding our two panelists? Thank you so much. So, thank you also to the Friends of the Library for bringing us together. There will be coffee and cookies in the lobby. Please stay and engage with your community members, and let's talk about this some more. I've learned a lot today. I hope you have too. I don't think we've come up with any hard and fast conclusions, but we sure have explored some of the underlying values and the questions that we all face in dealing with the new media culture. To close, I wanted to share with you a poem that's been running around in my head for a couple of months now. We are the library, after all. Emily Dickinson wrote this a long time ago. She was probably thinking about poetry, but like all great art, its meaning resonates no matter what century we're in. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight. The truth superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. Don't be blind. Use your brain. Use the library. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Devin.